Welcome back. National Deputy Commissioner Tebello Mosikili has admitted that there are corrupt police officials. She appeared before Parliament's ad hoc committee, which is investigating allegations of infiltration and political interference in the criminal justice system. Earlier, she told the committee that she was taken by surprise by the instruction to disband the political killings task team. Let's discuss her testimony with Unisa Political Sciences Professor Dirk Kotzé, University of KwaZulu-Natal criminologist Professor Nirmala Gopal, as well as legal analyst Advocate Mpilonhle Baloyi. A very good evening to my panel this evening. Thank you so much for your time and for joining us. Prof. Kotzé, let's just perhaps start with you. I mean, we saw the start of that testimony by the Deputy National Commissioner Mosikili earlier in this. Today was a continuation. How can her testimony help clarify what really is at the core of this process, that being whether political interference influenced some of those police decisions during this time?
Yes, good evening. I think what we've heard today is a different dimension or different angle within the police service about certain aspects. She is mostly involved with the national joints, the National Joint Cooperative Center, which is responsible for big events. For example, the G20 in the past, in earlier years, for example, the World Cup. Also the COVID pandemic and so on. So she's not necessarily involved in all aspects of the police, and that came out very much in her testimony also. I think the point that you've raised, which about whether she was aware or being consulted about the disbandment of the political task team, killings task team, that to a large extent confirms what many of her before her, including General Nkunase, has said. So she looked like a relatively uncontroversial person. She's not put on the spot as being one of the persons that can be implicated in many of the aspects. But being such a senior person in the police service, at I would say, one can say, the second tier of the police, that was significant of to what extent there was a general understanding and consultation with that tier at the very senior level about such an important component of the police services, namely the PKTT. So I think that will contribute to the committee's understanding of what were the circumstances, what was the context within which that decision was taken and later then implemented, or tried to be implemented, actually.
Sure.
Yeah.
Advocate Baloyi, I see you nodding your head there, especially when Prof speaks about her not necessarily being seen as a controversial figure, but also quite an important figure, given that she's second from the top, and some of those decisions that she may have made have got also quite a lot of weight with regards to which way things would sway.
That is very true, Katleho. Good evening, and good evening to the fellow panelists, the professors. Her evidence was really different from what we've heard. And what was striking out is the fact that at the helm of power, which she's at, she did not know much what was happening around that time, and she was shocked, suggesting that she was sidelined. And when we look at the legal empowerments of both the ministry and SAPS, one derives its powers from the Constitution, one derives its powers from the SAPS Act. And this goes to speak to the doctrine of separation of powers and an ultimate question of who actually bosses who. Because if the ministry was responsible for the policy, the SAPS would then be responsible for the actioning it out. And if there was complete incoherence between the two, things were very much bound to turn out the way that they did.
Most certainly. Prof. Gopal, maybe let's just bring in some of these aspects that we are hearing with regards to Major General Mosikili. What do you think would be the potential risks or the consequences, particularly of political interference within police investigations, especially when we look at a very politically sensitive case, such as that of political killings?
So good evening, Katlego and my fellow panelists. So yeah, I think I want to start off by saying definitely, she provided a slightly different dimension to the conversation in as far as evidence is concerned. I don't think she necessarily gave us much meat in terms of political interference. I think she was quite evasive when she was asked those specific questions. So in terms of her testimony, I think by and large she was overcautious. I also believe that I would ask there, a series of questions that I would pose to her and around her, but also about her leadership, given the fact that she's sitting in a really high-profile and a seriously influential position. I think the fact that to me, she came across as being uncritical, accepting what is shared with her or instructions given to her. And I think at that level of policing and that level of accountability, surely there should be some critical engagement with what's happening at that level. So by and large, for me, she came across as someone who wants to be unproblematic, who does not want to rock the boat, but also given the fact that she says there's no post or no office called acting national commissioner, but I don't think she understood what they were really asking her. Given the fact that she was in an acting capacity for the national commissioner at that point in time, and not being part of the conversations, hands-on, the fact that it was delayed, etc., for me further suggested that her level of seriousness within her portfolio, but also in the acting national commissioner portfolio, is not being taken seriously. So I don't necessarily believe she gave us much meat in terms of the nature or extent of political interference. She was overly cautious.
Well, it's interesting that you should say that, Prof. Gopal, that she was quite uncritical and also on the fence. She was asked a question by one of the DA members of the Parliamentary Ad Hoc Committee, and this was to the decision that she made internally with regards to that directive of the disbandment. Let's take a listen.
I said, as acting national commissioner, were you legally entitled to question or refuse implementation of a directive you believe to be unconstitutional?
I believe so, yes.
General, in your original statement, you confirmed that you preceded the directive and issued the internal instructions. It was around between paragraph 21 and 27. In your supplementary statement, you described the same directive as political interference affecting the constitutional mandate of SAPS. That was paragraph 20 of the supplementary. Can you explain how you reconcile implementing a directive you now describe as a political interference?
So I have indicated earlier that before implementing the directive, because of the nature and the gravity that it will have on operations, the first point of my departure was to contact the National Commissioner to get the directive on how to deal with the matter. And the advice that I got is that in the meantime, we can continue to prepare the reports that will be dealt with, because the minister is expecting a presentation mid-January. And mid-January for me, if I were to put a date to it, will be after the 15th of January. So the implementation of the directive was in preparation to have the meeting that the minister is requesting. And yes, in its form and nature, from the time that it was issued, I took for me that this is an operational matter.
All right, so we continue with that, Prof. Kotzé. I mean, just taking from that response by Major General Mosikili, that contradiction that was posed there, that internally it seemed as though she had moved with the directive, but in accordance to her statement, she saw it as a constitutional interference affecting the constitutional mandate of SAPS. What did you make of that response in relation to what she had put down on her statement?
Yes, it appears to be a contradiction, but I think what possibly played a role here is that she obviously is aware of the existence of both processes, the ad hoc committee in Parliament and the Mpilonhle Commission, and there appeared more or less a consensus in both of them that with respect to the constitutionality of that decision and the role that the minister played in that. So I think she took sort of embraced or took that over. I won't say it's necessarily her original idea or her original understanding of it. I think what we are also seeing is that because she was the acting national commissioner, and what was interesting is that she said today that she only saw the email about 2 days after it was sent to her. So it wasn't as if there was a urgency or an awareness that there's something urgent that must be attended to. The fact that the General Masemola would come back to continue with his position as the National Commissioner soon after the December-January break, I think also played a role that she felt that an important decision like this and the implementation, as well as what was now explained about what the minister expected of them, meant that she was actually waiting for General Masemola to take the lead in this, and that she was merely playing the role of a person who's watching the space, but not necessarily taking any initiative. So I think in that sense, yes, she was very cautious, but to some extent one can understand it because she is there for a very short period of time as the acting national commissioner. And it could be even controversial if she took a decision that General Masemola not necessarily agreed with.
Advocate Baloyi, where then do you draw the line in terms of what Prof is saying with regards to being quite cautious when it comes to certain decisions, and also while you're safeguarding, actually ensuring that you do take decisions at a particular time, regardless of how sensitive it may be?
Well, I agree with what Prof. Kotzé is saying, and we need to understand this in the context of the probative value of the evidence that she gave today. And by probative value, I'm referring to the evidential weight in context of the scope of the ad hoc committee as a whole. And this emanates from the revelations of Lieutenant General Kwanazi. And at the end of the day, we need a solution. And when the ad hoc committee goes and consolidates the reports, recommendations, they need to do so from a very, very thorough point of view, because that's what we want to see happening at the end of the day. So evidence such as the one we had today was very much uncontroversial. I remember towards the end, the chairperson even commented to say that this is the shortest witness that the commission or the ad hoc committee has dealt with. And it was quite light, and it just exposes the level of how much it could be true that she knew nothing. And because even from her evidence today, for her to have been in the acting position around that time, there's a lot that doesn't add up. So this can only suggest cover-ups, targeting of adversaries, and the protection of allies.
And Prof. Gopal, what picture does this paint with regards to maybe just how some of these institutions are, with regards to how certain individuals that would sit in particular positions are able to move or not be able to maneuver, especially when it comes to critical decisions?
Yes, Katlego, while I was watching the commission, the ad hoc committee, there were many questions that arose for me. And the first one was, if we have individuals with this particular constituency wanting to make sure or needing to make sure that the citizens of the country are safe and secure, the likelihood of that happening is very minimal. Because I could not, like I said earlier, I couldn't hear that critical voice. And as a criminologist, one needs to have a critical voice because you need to problematize aspects, etc., so that you can arrive at solutions that are workable and, you know, for the benefit of the country. So that was one of the issues for me. The second one was that it sounds as though the management of SAPS is so inwardly focused at the moment because of the amount of corruption that's taking place within SAPS itself. So instead of focusing on, you know, spending the time, energy, and resources outwardly, I think it's just so misdirected. But at the same time, it's a huge worry for the country that we are almost, it sounds as though we are riddled with crime and corruption within SAPS that's debilitating SAPS officials, etc., to focus outwardly. So that for me is a huge concern at this point in time. There's just too much of investment, whether it's resources, person power, etc., within SAPS, trying to normalize SAPS. I mean, it's only just begun, and largely because of General Mkonazi's July 6 statement, and both these, the ad hoc commission as well as the ad hoc committee, as well as the ad hoc commission. I mean, I'm not sure what and how long it's going to take for us to get anywhere close to normality.
Certainly, that inward focus is taking up so much of what could be put as resources towards the country. Let's take a quick ad break. We are continuing with that testimony that we saw today out of the ad hoc committee of the Deputy National Police Commissioner Mosikili. We do have our panel of guests that are unpacking the statement for us. So do stay with us, and you can also get engaged with us either by WhatsApp or giving us a call. But we'll see you after this. Welcome back. We are unpacking the proceedings that took place today at the Parliamentary Ad Hoc Committee with the Deputy National Police Commissioner, Lieutenant General Tebello Mosikili. With me is Unisa Political Sciences Professor Dirk Kotzé, University of KwaZulu-Natal criminologist, Professor Nirmala Gopal, as well as legal analyst, Advocate Mpilonhle Baloyi. So we've been having this conversation with regards to interference, and sometimes that interference does come from external factors. Let's take a listen to when the Deputy National Police Commissioner was speaking about her first encounter with Paul O'Sullivan.
The first encounter is when Paul O'Sullivan was providing information in relation to other matter that was under investigation that was involving one of the convicted criminal, rather than Krecha. So that is when I started to know Paul O'Sullivan. Even came to my office with other files or the personnel of his office, but I received a call from him that they want to hand the dossier on another investigation. So I did interacted, and I know that Paul O'Sullivan was interacting, or Ndade Paul O'Sullivan, because he is older than me, and I'm taught to respect and call him Mr. Paul O'Sullivan.
All right, that's Lieutenant General Tebello Mosikili, the Deputy National Police Commissioner, talking about her first encounter with Paul O'Sullivan. Prof. Kotzé, I mean, we've seen the involvement of Paul O'Sullivan, some allegations against him in other statements that were already made at the Parliamentary Ad Hoc Committee. This particular period that the Deputy National Police Commissioner is speaking about is when she was the acting Gauteng Police Commissioner. What do you make of this encounter, especially with all the other information that we have received around Paul O'Sullivan? I know this is an inquisitorial process, so we need to tread carefully with regards to how we link some of these dots. But she speaks of a time that he was bringing her information about Radovan Krecha.
Yes, I think, the person of Paul O'Sullivan has always been very controversial. That's how I associate him with that throughout all these periods. And that he has been involved sometimes in situations where it was difficult for me to understand how he has access to the police, how he can be so in the midst of it, whether it is about Jackie Selebi or whether it is this case or some others also. Incidentally, it's coming back to the ad hoc committee, which I think is going to be highly interesting after he walked away a few days ago. So I think what they will use this type of information, the ad hoc committee, in order to probe him further. They went very much in the first session about his personal history, where he came from the UK, his possible involvement in intelligence, British intelligence, and what he did in South Africa and how he became involved, and some to a large extent without any sort of specific qualifications. That raised a lot of questions in the committee also. But so not officially qualifying for these positions, whether it's the one at AXA, for the airports, or in the police itself, or as a private investigator, or as a police reservist. So he was in all sorts of positions. And I think that makes it very difficult for us, for me at least, to be able to understand who is the real Paul O'Sullivan and what is the role that he played, because he became so much involved. IPIT is another controversial matter in relation to Robert McBride, amongst other things. And what is the role that he played during all of these years? And to what extent does he know about what General Mkonasi was stating at the 6th of July press conference? And what then the ad hoc committee wants from him? What is the question I'm asking myself? Is he regarded as a person of interest? That means that he is possibly involved in some of these activity, or is he a resource person with information that he can give to the committee? And that's up to now hasn't been clear really to me at least.
Is it getting clearer to you, Prof. Gopal, whether Paul O'Sullivan would be a person of interest, especially when we see how far back it dates in terms of his engagements with the top brass within SAPS?
I'm not sure what a person of interest necessarily means for the ad hoc committee. But what I do realize, and I have realized thus far, is that the ad hoc committee, and I've said this before, don't seem to be necessarily prepared in advance to ask the kind of questions depending on the outcome they want to achieve. And I think Prof. Kotzé mentioned, something similar now. We're not sure at this point in time exactly what it is they want to achieve. But my sense at the moment is that they're trying to find out whether he is a spy, for the British government. But if that's what they want to achieve via the questioning, they're certainly not creating or crafting their questions to lead them into him providing those kind of responses. So I think it's going to be really critical for them to think through carefully the kinds of questions they want to ask, but also to set aside political differences and coordinate the questions in a way that they are able to derive maximum out of his presence. And I suspect this might be his last presence at the ad hoc committee, and I seriously hope that they won't spend half of their time interrogating him about why he had prematurely departed, etc., because then I think it wastes the taxpayers' time and money. And, I really believe that they need to be very focused in terms of what they want to ask him.
Advocate Baloyi, when we're still staying on this Paul O'Sullivan issue, and if in any way there would be political or any kind of interference from a figure such as Paul O'Sullivan, what would be the legal safeguards, especially for those within SAPS, in order for that to be put in place to prevent such interferences?
Yeah, well, it's a very interesting one. Even though lately it's difficult to speak about Paul O'Sullivan and not laugh, given his recent stints. But he is an interesting witness.
Yeah.
And the suggested infiltration by him and the role that he plays, I feel needs to be properly unveiled. He could, of course, he could be a spy for international intelligence or whatever the case, but it has to come down to what this ad hoc committee is actually about and how helpful is his testimony. And this speaks then to reform, internal reforms, because it clearly there's a leadership deficiency. If firstly, an office holder at this type of realm that knows nothing and doesn't say much is very, very much concerning on the caliber of leaders that we have. Secondly, it would be also an issue of strengthening those internal policies and avoid politics. So that internal reform would then speak to the appointment of officers right from the beginning, and also ensuring a proper line between the issue that I mentioned earlier, the one of separation of powers, because it is a constitutional prescript, a constitutional fundamental, that the minister, of course, works under the scope of the constitution, and the SAPS would then work under the scopes of the SAPS Act, and those lines need to be drawn so that no one ever bosses the other and no one ever really overlooks the other, because clearly this discourse speaks to the fact that there is an improper relationship between the ministry and the SAPS itself in terms of operations, because it sounds now that the ministry is involved in operations, which should not be the case, because they are responsible for the policy, but then SAPS should actually carry it out with their own operational plan in the absence of political interference.
And I'm sure if we were to have more of these commissions and committees, we'd find that there's a lot of improper relations between the political office and the administrative office of many other departments that exist in the country. But of course, that would be a conversation for another day. Let's take a quick break. I'm with my panel of guests, and we are unpacking the testimony of the Deputy Police National Commissioner of the Police, and that is Lieutenant General Tebello Mosikili. We'll see you right after this ad break. Welcome back. We are just unpacking the final bits of the DNPC's testimony that took place today at the ad hoc committee with my panel of guests. Prof. Gopal, staying during the time when the DNPC was the acting Gauteng Police Commissioner, the issue of the Senzo Meyiwa murder case also came up, and she spoke about being the one that called General Sibiya to the murder scene. He had previously said someone had called him, but she put it on record that it was her that called him because she said he was the head of the DPCI of the Hawks in the province at that particular time. Under what circumstances would a head of the DPCI be called to a murder scene?
So, Katleho, I'm not very familiar in terms of that protocol, but what I do want to say is that it just sounded also messy and blurry. And I think it was for the first time that we got it from the horse's mouth in terms of what really occurred at the scene of the crime on that particular day. But what was even more disturbing is when Matthias spoke about the fact that she and a friend of hers walked through the crime scene undetected, undeterred, and the fact that there was no, blood splatter, etc. I think that was far more concerning to me when I listened to evidence being presented today. But clearly, one would wonder then also if we go back to the notion of how Sibiya ended up at the crime scene, and given the fact that Sibiya has been mentioned to be participating, or allegations at this point in time, participating in many nefarious activities, one would wonder whether it was part of his role to be there. And of course, also the duplication of personnel, which is something that the chairperson spoke about as well. So I think if we think about duplication, it's duplication of resources. It's about, confusing matters at a scene of crime, etc. So I think these really must be unpacked in greater detail. And I'm hoping that, I'm trusting that the ad hoc committee in their recommendations will very clearly set out how the duplication actually interferes with crime processes, etc., and make some very tangible policy-related solutions or recommendations.
Right. Prof. Kotzé, what stood out for you with regards to that particular part of the testimony with the Senzo Meyiwa murder and having the then acting Gauteng Police Commissioner called General Sibiya to the scene?
Yeah, I think that was an interesting point, which wasn't sort of part of the main evidence, but it gave us an sort of an insight into some of the complications there. I mean, we know that this court case is going on now for years already, and it doesn't seem as if it's going in any direction in terms of conclusion. And there's so many different versions of what actually happened there. I think Ms. Matthyson's the points that she raised there as one of the EFF representatives on the committee was very strange. The fact that she and a friend could walk into the house, not stopped by anyone, and that was at the early stage after the murder, and only later on they sort of secured that area. And then what we have known, which were not necessarily presented today, is the presence of very senior police persons at the scene or very close to it and discussing this matter. It creates very much some suspicion of that there was something very much untoward that took place there over and above the murder itself. So I think this just deepens the mysterious nature of the murder, the court case that is dragging on and just can't reach a point of conclusion. And we don't know to what, I personally don't know if we are going to know in the end what actually happened there and who's responsible for what. And today's evidence just deepened that mysterious nature of it.
Advocate Baloyi, do you think it deepened that mysterious nature of it to have the multiplicity of senior police officials who were on the scene, what we heard from EFF member Matthys in terms of how the scene was not protected from the get-go? Do you think that this is going to somewhat still prolong this case, and maybe this is why we've seen such a prolonged time of this case coming to conclusion?
Yeah, well, it's got multiple implications. Firstly, we must remember that when we speak of the Meyiwa murder trial, it's still ongoing. There are men who are on trial for this murder, and it's taking so long, a lot has happened. Those men stand the risk of serious sentencing from the court, which has got implications on them, implications on their freedom as we currently speak. Now, if there are suggestions that there could have been possible contamination of the scene by this multiplicity of resources, which also shows that there is an existence of multiple centers of power, and power is not centralized. So it raises concern, and I'm trying to link this to what bearing does it have on the trial itself. Remember, the state has got the responsibility or the task of proving its case beyond a reasonable doubt. And I'm just worried that all these things that are busy popping out are creating some sort of doubt.
As we close off, Prof. Gopal, maybe if we look at this from a broader perspective, what role do you believe transparency and accountability plays in restoring the public confidence? As I think this is one question we'll constantly ask when we close off such sessions from the Parliamentary Ad Hoc Committee as well as the Madlanga Commission, because it's the restoration of the public in these services, and I think also most importantly in ensuring that these institutions function at their most efficient.
So certainly transparency and accountability for me are non-negotiables. And given the nature of the institution, which is, and I mentioned this previously, SAPS was one of the institutions in South Africa during the change in government that underwent a major overhaul. And the objectives at that time, but also the expectations, was that we were going to see a very different policing service compared to the force and its historical connotations, etc. And given the fact that we have the constitution that we currently have, that we all hoped would hold the police service accountable, transparent, fair, etc., and we are not seeing that at this point in time. It's going to take a hell of a long time to restore public confidence. But let's hope that through the commission, through the ad hoc committee hearings, etc., we will slowly but surely start to restore confidence. It's really about how do you eat an elephant. But I think there has to be commitment and dedication to wanting to see transformation in SAPS.
Well, most certainly. Thank you so much to all of my panelists this evening. It certainly is a pleasure to have your insights. We do appreciate your time. That was Prof. Dirk Kotzé, Professor of Political Sciences at Unisa, University of KwaZulu-Natal, criminologist, Professor Nirmala Gopal, as well as legal analyst advocate Mpilonhle Baloyi. All right, that's how we wrap up this hour. We'll be back with more headlines and other stories in the next hour. Do stay with us.